Hello and welcome to Alive and Composing the Wonderful World of Innova with today's guest, Dorothy Hindman. Would you please state your name for the record?
I'm Dorothy Hindman. I'm a composer.
That's a bit of luck because I was hoping you'd be the one who has an amazing album called Tapping the Furnace, which we'll get to in a little bit. But first of all, tell us about your pet. We're doing a longitudinal survey of composers and their pets. Do you have any weird ones living in Miami?
I have two cats, and they are littermates. They're brothers, and we got them when they were just tiny little creatures. And now one is about 20 pounds. He's huge. And the other one is nice and slim and sort of a redneck of a cat, sort of a cat dog. So we have the princess and we have the cat dog.
Do they have interesting names that elicit your innermost creativity?
Well, it's my children's innermost creativity. We allowed them to name them. And there's a series of books called the Warriors books, which is about feral cats who live in a community. And it's really kind of a wonderful set of books for fourth graders, fifth graders. And so the fat animal is named Speckletail, despite the fact that he has no speckles on his tail or anywhere else. But then we allowed our younger child to name the other one, and he named him Dr. von Katzenstein. So Katzenstein for short.
You mentioned something about kids. You've got those too, and they're feral. Did they turn out all right?
They're great. They're great. So my kids are my dogs. And one is 15, his name is Jacob, and he is a concert pianist already. And then the other is 12, and his name is Willie, and he wants to be a marine biologist. Although the other day he told me, I've changed my mind. I want to be an actor, author, comedian, marine biologist. So we'll see.
I wonder where they get all of those qualities from. And okay, before we go back deep into the past, you also have a creative husband type, yes?
I do. My husband is Charles Norman Mason, who is also a composer, and we met at a composers conference of all places. But we actually kept in touch because I was producing a CD, and his students at Birmingham Southern College had just produced a CD. This was back in the days when it was much more difficult to find a new music label, and so we were looking for a house to actually press the CD. So that brought us together. So
we find here at Innova that record labels often serve as introductions to personals. So
really?
You'd be surprised.
I would be.
Okay, where did all this come from? What was the first aha moment when you thought, I can be more creative than that thing they're putting in front of me, and I can do... Was there a moment when it all just became clear?
Probably. There probably was, and it probably came in college. But it was a moment when I realized that people were still composing classical music for orchestra. I was very naive. I was studying to be in a rock band. I was studying synthesis particularly. And I took sort of this requisite course in 20th century music, and my whole world changed. And I realized you didn't have to be a film composer to compose for orchestra, and that was it. I was hooked. But I realized I had always composed. I had always made up songs. I can remember when I was very, very young, maybe 2 or 3, picking out a song for my then cat and making it up. So I think I just found myself, but for a long time I was really unaware that that was a potential career path. So.
And where was that? Did you grow up?
I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I was very grateful for the community college system there because I wasn't so great in high school. I skipped a lot. I was bored. And so with my grades, I wasn't going to any university. Plus, my parents said, you have to pay for it yourself. So I tested well into this Miami-Dade, what is now Miami-Dade College. At that time it was 2-year. But it had the best music program in the country for a community college. And so that's where I started, and they made special arrangements for me to study what was then analog synthesis. They had a big bank where you would patch chord things in and out, and I had always wanted synthesizer to be my instrument. So we had this old Moog album. It was the Moog demo album, actually. And I listened to it when I was maybe 9 or 10, and I was like, oh, that's my instrument. That's what I want to do. So again, I think I was always a composer, just unaware that you could do that for a life.
Were you the only female in the studio at the time, or?
I was the only student. They actually engaged a graduate student. His name is Joe Koikar. He is in Wisconsin now, I think at University of Madison, Wisconsin. But back then he was a grad student at University of Miami. And he came over and gave me lessons especially, and I had a Prophet 600 that I brought in, and he taught me how to, well, from what he taught me, I learned how to work that. And then he said he would make me do compositions as projects. And after a couple, he said, you really ought to go to University of Miami and study with Dennis Cam. And that was it for me.
I know you've traveled a lot, but where's your favorite place in the world?
My favorite place in the world, and I almost don't want to say because it's kind of unspoiled, but it's Split, Croatia. And it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I actually have a picture on the inside of my CD, my little portrait bio page, is a picture of Split. So Split is, the city portion of Split is Diocletian's summer palace. And it is completely made of white marble and white limestone. And it simply glows, and there are small hotels tucked into it. There are beautiful little specialty stores, and it's a magical kind of a place. Absolutely beautiful. It turns out that's where the Italians go for their vacations, but I think it's relatively unknown here.
Do you think that it has qualities that are similar to the qualities you look for in any kind of art form or music, or does it attract you as a comfortable place to be in the sense that certain kinds of music are comfortable to be with? It
does. So I'm very interested in one of the areas I'm interested in, because of course there are so many things that you can be excited about in music, but one of the areas that I find very interesting is the perception of the history of wherever I happen to be. And so I lived in Rome for a year, and if anybody's ever been to Rome, you know that you can be standing in a piazza and there's a Starbucks, and there's also a 15th century church, basilica, and then there's the Ferrari store. And so there's high, low everywhere. And you also respond aesthetically to these ancient places. It makes you reflect on, the whole of humanity. But it's a very postmodern experience because of the juxtaposition of everything. And I think that Summer Palace is exactly that. We're talking about 400 AD when it was built, and now you can go to a tiny little nook in it, and there's somebody who's making designer stilettos this high, made to order. And so it's just, again, the same kind of great juxtaposition. I draw a lot of inspiration from that, because I realize that when you look at some place from history, say a 1,000-year-old or even more, a 1,500-year-old palace, you can't possibly understand it, but you're moved by it nevertheless. So it's this incomplete understanding of history. It's this acknowledgement that what I'm understanding from some monument is wrong, probably because of the society I live in. That intrigues me greatly, incredibly. I draw a lot of inspiration from that, and my music then, I'll leave incomplete moments for the listener to fill in their own way, or understand in their own way. So that's one way that, say, Diocletian Summer Palace or Split makes its way into my music and informs my art.
There's a lot of strings to your bow, a lot of tentacles to your arms. You're not just a composer, you are a radio personality, a celebrity, a teacher, a critic. How do all these things fit under one calendar?
Well, I guess I realized a long time ago that a lot of people have great ideas, but very few people act on their ideas. I realized that, I think, in graduate school. And when you leave college, when you finish your degrees, you realize there is no path in music. There just isn't. And either you are going to carve your path, or you're going to leave music probably, or it will become, you know, an avocation. So I used absolutely everything that I ever learned and took jobs that were closer and closer and closer to music. And one of those jobs I adore, and that is teaching. And right now, my position allows me to teach composition, and that's it. And that is an incredible privilege for me, because I get to think about my music and also think about how to explain music to other people who want to create their own unheard music at this point. So I think along the way, I picked up all of these other activities. So my radio show, it's a volunteer show, and WVUM.org, you can stream every Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. And I picked that up as a way to keep listening to new music myself, and also to maybe build a community for that in Miami. There are a lot of great musicians in Miami, young people who appreciate this experimental kind of music. So that's the reason I do that. And then I simply had a job when I got to Miami, writing reviews, and I continue to do that because it enables me to meet amazing, amazing people. Lots of times they're very young artists who are just coming up, like Yuja Wang or Joshua Roman, or the Miami International Piano Festival brings in these kids who are amazing to make their debuts. And that has led me to go to concerts I probably wouldn't have gone to, and to meet musicians I probably wouldn't have gone to. So even though I have this great job, perfect sort of dream job, because it fulfills me as an artist, I keep these other things because they inform me, and they give me information I couldn't get just from teaching or composing. So.
And on some level, some of those things may filter into the music that we hear on your Tapping the Furnace CD. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So Tapping the Furnace is actually what I call my sampler, and it is my first solo CD. I've had a number of pieces appear on compilation CDs, but I have wanted to do my own CD that is a representative of what my art has been for the last, say, 15 years. And it really is sort of an aesthetic statement about who I am and what my interests are. So it begins with a saxophone piece called Drift, which is actually about the fact that you can't listen to a piece without drifting off. And so the piece has this one little riff, very funky little riff, and then I invert it. I do all these tricks with it, or with timbre, to sort of keep the person going back to the piece. And that fulfills my interest in perception. And then I've got a piece called Drowning by Numbers, which I wrote for Craig Hultgren, which explores my very strong interest in timbre. That's from 1994, and he wanted a piece because he had this Fender tube amp, and he specifically wanted amplification. So this piece runs the entire gamut of what you could do, but it also progresses from this single motive, 7 notes. And it starts from scratch tones, just as hard bowing as you can get, until it goes all the way off the other spectrum into whispery kinds of tones. And that piece I wrote specifically to be very aggressive, because I was hearing a lot of music by my friends and colleagues that was kind of meandering, and then suddenly you'd have this aggressive thing. And it just would pop in out of nowhere. So I thought, well, I'm going to take that aggressive moment and I'm going to follow it through to its conclusion. And to me, that's entropy. So that's another interest of mine. Timbral things, also the idea of one idea, just really done to death, I guess. And then let's see, Fin de Siècle. Fin de Siècle is for piano and tape. And I wrote that for Laura Gordy. And it was the end of the 20th century when I wrote it. And so it's sort of in these 3 parts. The electronic part at first sort of mimics the pianist. And in the middle, it begins to sort of go off into this nostalgic moment. Again, I play with timbre because I put paper inside the piano and I mute the strings at the end. And then the end part is almost all ring modulation. And the tape part comes up very loudly and sort of overtakes the piano part. And so again, history there. I see it as sort of almost Bach-like in the beginning, then Brahmsian in the middle, and then at the end, Boulesian, okay? And so it's sort of a look back over the piano styles. But it's also about studio music and live music, because the tape part is mimicking it first and then is an equal partner and then overtakes this live pianist. And that's sort of my interest in how the way we perceive media has changed quite a bit. And so if somebody's watching this, chances are they're alone and they're at their computer. And that's very, very different from a concert hall setting. So let's see, what's next on my...
Tapping the furnace, perhaps?
Tapping the furnace. So again, history. And in Birmingham, we have Sloss furnaces. And you might know it because the ghost hunters have been there and explored it. And it's really this huge, hulking, brick red empty furnace. And right now it's a place where iron artists go and they can smelt and create all these wonderful things. But it actually was built sometime in the 1880s, and it was so successful at making pig iron that by 1920 or so, Birmingham was a very wealthy city. And Birmingham wasn't even built until after the Civil War. So they called Birmingham the Magic City because it came up so fast. And it became a center for banking. Well, I think we all know that Birmingham's history is rather checkered. And after James Sloss sold his furnace, it was picked up by various interests. And at one point, they were using convict labor, where they would pay the prison $5 a month for the convict. The convict wouldn't see any money. And if the convict wouldn't work the furnace, they would put him in a sweatbox or tie him to a pole in the sun. And so it was really fairly horrific. And then in the 60s, it was what's called a company town. And a company town is where you work for a company and they provide your housing and they have a general store where you buy your food and your clothing. But the company charges prices that they don't actually ever pay in salary. So the worker can never catch up and is always beholden to the company and has to stay there. So it's hugely exploitative. And then finally, it kind of shut down in the 80s and just sat there empty until now it's an art haven. So I would drive past this place every day and just be so intrigued by this giant brick red set of pipes. And I thought, I'm going to find out about this place. And I went to their website in 2005. And I found a quote from Clarence, I can't remember his last name. It's in my notes though. And he had worked there for decades until it closed. And he had left a quote that said, "That weren't no placing." When you're working around a blast furnace, everything's dangerous. Overhead, underhead, everything's dangerous. And it weren't no easy job, not for the black man. And this quote was so powerful. And I was going to write a piece for Evelyn Glennie. I'd sat down with her and I found this quote and I thought, I'm going to write this mammoth piece that has this text interwoven into it. Again, it's a piece of entropy, just like the factory met its entropy. And over the course of the piece, I mute the drums one by one. The music is based on the numbers 7 and 24 because the pig iron had to be poured off every 7 hours, and it ran 24 hours a day. So that is the genesis of Tapping the Furnace, and that's really what it's all about. It's kind of an homage to Birmingham and this furnace that built it. And then after that, I've got a work called Needlepoint, and I guess I'm going to just go ahead and share this. Needlepoint I wrote when my mother was facing her third bout with cancer, which ultimately took her life. And I lived in Birmingham and she lived in Miami, so we were in phone conversation all the time. Pretty much every other day I would have to call her and sort of hear the litany of what was going on. And she, when she was feeling well, was embroidering this needlepoint sampler for my son, Jacob, who had been born in 1998. And this was probably 2000 when she passed away. But, you know, we went through about 10 years of this, up and down. And so needlepoint has many levels, and it has the level of the chemotherapy and the invasiveness, and it also has the level of this embroidery that she did that I still to this day don't quite understand. But she wanted to do this and she wanted to finish it. And so the music is all based on her telephone number from Miami. And so you can hear the different metric changes, and it goes from these sort of chugging normal days to these really bad days, just really bad days. And back, because you never really have good days in that, you just have normal days, which you celebrate. And by the end of the piece, even the normal material in the piece has been transformed into something a little bit darker. So that's Needlepoint. And then in complete contrast to that is Magic City, which is an orchestra piece. I got my first big grant from the state of Alabama in 1999 to write this orchestral piece, and I wrote it for the Alabama Symphony, and it celebrates the birth of my first child, Jacob, the pianist. And he was born on 8/14/98, so all the numbers in the piece have to do with that. It's only 4 chords. The first chord lasts probably 3 or 4 minutes. Gradually they get shorter and shorter. And it's an idea I stole from Louis Andriessen, where the pulse stays the same, but the rate of harmonic change speeds up. So from 30-something measures to every 16th note, these 4 chords change. And it gives you a sensation of speeding up even though the tempo stays the same. So I called it Magic City because I was just so happy to get this money and this support, which means a lot to a young composer.
Well, Dorothy, we really enjoy your music and much enjoyed learning more about the story behind it. So thanks a lot, and we look forward to more in the future.
Thank you, Philip. It's such a pleasure. I'm really honored to be on Innova. It was my dream to be on this label, and I think it's the best label for new music.